PA. This is a 39th PA seminar presentation in a series that are really oriented to people that are interested in active engagement within their communities. Many people are wanting to learn more about Prout. So we try to cover topics of interest to activists, people wanting to learn more about Prout. And we are always open to suggestions about topics that people would like to see covered. And we'll make every effort to find a content expert that's in a good position to do a solid program on that topic. We're also interested in people who have expertise in specific areas that might be willing to share their experience and expertise. So that's always appreciated. I will touch on, we have events scheduled. I'll touch on the next couple that are coming up, and we're working on going ahead and filling out the balance of the calendar year. Have a few candidates that we're working with and trying to get them scheduled. But coming up in June, Arthur Pacheco is going to do a program I think will be very interested. It's about psychoeconomy, which a key aspect of quadra economics. And you know, it's from an interesting perspective. He's going to, and he's a student right now in a mental health focus. And he's touching on a number of things that I think will be very fascinating to hear about. Then coming up in July, Ray Wood is going to be doing a presentation on Sadvipras and you know, the impact, the significance of that concept of leadership within society and you know, the transition of society. And otherwise, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Ms. Mohan. We've had her do presentations in the past, and it's always wonderful to have people return and share other thoughts, other areas, aspects of their expertise. Very quickly, if I may refer to you as Raksha, has been active in Prout ever since encountering it, a student, a writer, a teacher. So very involved. She serves on the PRI, the Prout Research Institute board in Asheville, North Carolina. She is one of the co-authors of a book. I will share this, and I encourage people to track it down. Climate Adaptation. This was published in conjunction with COP26, and her contribution, along with two other co-authors, is a chapter in that book, and in fact, the biggest chapter, about Prout and about some of the amazing work going on in Portugal right now. And so that's one thing. I think I may have mentioned earlier, her background is actually, she's a graduate engineer, has had a long career in software engineering. And in an effort to be, you know, more grounded in understanding economics, she's currently pursuing a master's degree in economics, and which I applaud and admire very much for that. But this evening, her program is Climate Change Adaptation Through Economic Democracy. And so at this point, I will turn the program over to you.
Thank you, John, for the introduction. I'll be sharing my screen. Let me know when y'all can see. Screen.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you, Dada. Okay, so in today's presentation, I'll be talking about climate change adaptation through economic democracy. This was actually a paper I wrote for, it was a requirement for fulfillment of a graduate course that I took in the course of my master's degree in economics. And the ideas I presented in this paper resonated with the professor that I was working with, and she got it published to the university database, library database at Wright State University. So I'll be presenting some elements of that paper in this presentation. Okay, so here is a rough agenda for today's presentation. Talking about economic growth in the context of climate change, or climate change in the context of economic growth, whichever way you see it. Some of the climate action and economic democracy movements, and trying to situate Prout at the center of climate change adaptation, along with other climate justice and economic justice movements and proposals. And finally, trying to find an alignment between Prout and other movements so that we can all work together to come up with some practical solution for a justice-based climate change adaptation. So starting the discussion with where are we now? We are clearly in the middle of a polycrisis or a meta-crisis, whichever way you want to identify this. And what do we mean by a crisis of this nature? It means that many independent crises are interdependent and interconnected, and they're interacting with each other and kind of exacerbating the effects of each other. And this is a kind of situation that cannot be solved on its own. We cannot pick and choose each crisis and solve them on their own. We need to take a holistic and an integrated look into everything, and nothing short of systems change can solve this crisis. So what are the crises we find? Climate change, biodiversity loss, resource depletion, economic inequality, social and political unrest, and conflict, polarization, and wars. Every other day, a new war is coming up on the scene, as you all may have seen in the news. So these are the crises which are influencing each other, and we can tie them all down to one common cause, and that is the paradigm of economic growth, which is capitalism. By nature, capitalism is extremely extractive. Capitalism doesn't care about the scruples of morality or care or concern for human and non-human life forms on the planet. So that has kind of brought us into the planet to the brink of destruction. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a UN body, reports that 1.5 degrees Celsius is a limit for temperature rise, and above which many types of tipping points or natural thresholds within the ecosystem are breached. And after this point, the consequences of such breaches will become unpredictable. So this is why we find ourselves in situations where climate catastrophes, forest fires and storms and cyclones, these have become extreme over the years, and the weather patterns have become extremely unpredictable. So that's what has led to all these crises: biodiversity loss, species going extinct at a rapid rate, resource depletion. We are in an era of capitalism, which is marked by hyperconsumption, and humanity has already used up all the resources of the planet for its current survival. Some reports say that we need 1.7 Earths to sustain consumption, not just one Earth. And this also, another characteristic of capitalism is economic inequality. And all of these crises are influencing each other and exacerbating each other's effect. So trying to situate climate change adaptation in the context of economic growth makes us look into who is consuming how much of the planet's resources, and who are the biggest contributors to climate change, who are the biggest polluters of the planet. The Global Carbon Project, which is a research project which in collaboration with World Climate Research Program, they come up with data and statistics about carbon emissions. And as you can see from this picture, the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide In the West, we have the United States of America, China and India in the East, but they also have a huge population to feed. And then we have high carbon emission among oil producing countries in the Middle East, and Europe, of course, which is also marked by high consumption of resources. So Global Carbon Project was formed as an international science community to provide a common baseline, or a mutually agreed upon knowledge base to support policy debate and action to slow down the effects of climate change. And they come up with this carbon emission report every year. To emphasize again, some of the biggest contributors to anthropogenic climate change are developed and highly industrialized nations. Now, there is a big debate about what caused the climate change. There are people who say climate change climate change is a result of natural causes, natural change in the cycles of the planet. And that is partially true. And P.R. Sarkar talks about it in his discourse coming off the Ice Age, where he talks about pole shifts and change in the global climate as a result of pole shifts. While there are natural causes, the biggest cause of climate change is also human economic activity since the industrialized revolution. Economic growth in developed countries is characterized by materialistic overconsumption. Developed nations also enjoy a far higher standard of living compared to developing nations. On the one hand, there are a group of nations that consume a lot more resources. On the other hand, there are many mid-income and low-income countries where the economic growth barely satisfies their basic consumption needs. So a Global Carbon Project report talks about United States that in just 16 days, it puts more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than Pakistan does in 1 year. African nations also fall under the category of mid-income or low-income countries, and they have 15% of the world's population, but they're only responsible for 3.8% of the carbon emission. India is the world's largest consumer of coal and the most populous country on the planet. They justify their consumption because of the population, and they justify the amount of coal they use without making concerted efforts to move towards more greener ways of generating energy by saying that we didn't create the climate change patterns that we are seeing now. It was the responsibility, the bigger part of the responsibility lies on the developed nations of the world. While I'm not justifying this argument, all I'm saying is that there is inequality in economic growth in different parts of the world, and different people have different reasons to control their carbon emissions or not. And China is also the world's biggest carbon emitter, showing no signs of reducing dependency on coal, despite all the climate goals that has been set up by international agreements like the Paris Accord and IPCC agreements. China actually plans to peak its emission by 2030. So each nation is looking for their own economic growth. And to some extent, that is justified because some of the poorest countries on the planet have been historically the smallest polluters. They're not the largest polluters of the planet. Once again, summing it all up, what is the most the current system of growth or the most prominent paradigm of development? Capitalism. And capitalism is fueled by this myth of boundless material growth. So this current system of growth has led to all these crises we discussed that has led to a major poly crisis in the form of climate change. Capitalism is characterized by extraction, which means overshoot of the resource base of the planet. Exclusion, which means it creates a class of haves and have-nots. And the profits are not distributed equitably. The resources are not distributed equitably. Accumulation of wealth, again, creating a huge income inequality, stratification, like I was speaking about the classes capitalism has created, and oppression and isolation. So we see that one of the problems is economic growth, defined in terms of unlimited growth of material wealth and its consumption. And that is the main driver of all industrial and commercial activities. And therefore, it's also the principal cause of climate change. Therefore, it begs the question, what should growth look like? Should it be unlimited material growth, or are there alternative definitions of growth? And this is where I started looking at alternative systems, socioeconomic systems of development. And of course, Prout should be situated at the forefront of proposing solutions in the form of alternatives. Yeah, a little bit more about the context of economic growth. It's important to recognize that economic growth depends on biological inputs of the planet, and it must be situated within biophysical limitations of the planet. And economic growth should serve the people and must be situated in social and ethical context if it has to serve justice to everybody. And limiting material growth for the sake of mitigating climate change is also a form of injustice perpetuated against the poorer countries. There should be a balanced form of economic development, a kind of economic development paradigm that focuses on rational distribution and progressive utilization of resources. So when we are talking about situating economic growth within the biophysical and ecological limits of the planet, we come across various other suggestions like degrowth or steady state economics, which is essentially talking about limiting growth itself. But that may not be an ideal policy measure for countries that have already been excluded out of the economic growth defined by capitalism. So the poorer nations have already been excluded from enjoying the benefits of industrialization and rapid economic growth that justifies the wealth of the developed countries of the planet. So in order to provide equal opportunities to everybody, what we envision in the future should be based in justice. Climate change adaptation should be based in social and economic justice, and also be placed within ecological and ethical contexts. That leads to the discussion of merging climate movements with economic democracy movements. There is a growing recognition in all climate movements that climate change is not just about mitigation or strategies to prevent harm. And it's also not just about ecological restoration or preventing the extent to which climate change catastrophes are affecting the planet. We are living in the middle of a climate change with unpredictable weather patterns, and we recognize that these unpredictable weather patterns affect the most vulnerable communities in ways they're not equipped to protect themselves. So climate change movements are talking not just about avoiding harms, but also sharing the burden of climate change. And climate change is actually not just about the climate anymore. It's used as an umbrella crisis that covers the social, economic, political, and ecological implications of climate change. So there are various ways in which we can enable a just climate change adaptation. Some movements talk about distributive justice, that is, limiting excessive consumption of a few to prevent overuse or abuse of the planet's resources. And at the same time, use those resources to support the development of the communities that are already vulnerable and that are already living in very precarious conditions and and do not have any capacity to protect themselves from the effects of climate change. Other ways of addressing just climate change adaptation is economic democracy, empowering local people and communities to manage their own resources. Communities are always better equipped to weather the shocks of climate change when they become empowered and manage their local resources and the economy themselves without economic plans being thrust upon them by external corporations or external development agencies like the World Bank or IMF, which control how they run their economy. So empowering local people is a very important part of just climate change adaptation. And climate science and academic researchers, they've all been drawing attention to this intersectional nature of climate change, the biodiversity loss, resource depletion that again affects economic inequality. And they've all been suggesting that climate solutions should arise from grassroots movement, from the bottom up. So this demands an integrated, holistic approach to replace capitalism, which is a current paradigm of development. And to do this, we need to redefine growth. We need to redefine ownership. We need to recognize that there is interconnectedness between one part of the planet to another part of the planet. There are no isolated systems when it comes to climate change. And look for people-centered and planet-centered development paradigms. And naturally, for Proutists, that leads us to Prout. But it's also important to recognize that there are other economic democracy movements and climate action movements that are adjacent to the Prout movement. They talk about the same things we are talking about, and we need to find commonality between these movements. So that led me to study a few economic democracy and Prout adjacent movements that are out there. I first went to solidarity economy and studying the cooperative movements. Solidarity economy is also this alternative socioeconomic model. It prioritizes justice, social welfare, cooperation, which are all some of the concepts within the progressive utilization theory also. It emphasizes shared prosperity, community empowerment, and practices like fair trade and ethical finance, etc. Along with solidarity economy, cooperative movements are a part of solidarity economy. I came across Climate Justice Alliance, and this is an organization that has been around since 2013, I think, and they have a just transition framework that aligns with many of the Prout values. And there are also economists and social scientists working in the area of just climate change adaptation. Pavlina Chernieva, one of those economists, she wrote a book, which is a very small primer and talks about the case for a job guarantee to empower communities to become resilient to climate change and climate change catastrophes. And there is another book, which was also a form of policy proposal that came on the aftermath of COVID. It is called A Democratized Work, the case for reorganizing the economy. And I'll be talking about it in some detail. So first talking about Prout and how it provides this kind of paradigm shift to redefine growth, to redefine what ownership looks like, and to redefine economic development. I've tried to capture it as a summary in this picture. In my paper, I've captured all the important aspects of Prout as an annotated bibliography of various Prout books and resources and policy papers that I could lay my hands on. And it runs for about 10 to 11 pages, but I'm trying to summarize it in 1 or 2 slides here. So what does the growth model in Prout look like? First of all, growth in Prout is a balance between material growth and a growth of non-material nature. There is an emphasis on physical, mental, and spiritual growth. So this itself, redefining progress and redefining growth in non-material terms, this itself has a very profound influence on the way we think about organizing our economies. This has a very profound influence on the way we utilize the resources of the planet. Infinite material growth within the finite boundaries of the planet's material resources, that is a myth perpetuated by capitalism, and that is not ecologically sustainable. So in Prout, growth is defined as physical, mental, and spiritual growth. There is no burden of excessive material growth to actually count as progress. So consumption in Prout, what does it look like? It is minimum requirements and maximum amenities. Minimum requirements ensures that everybody has basic requirements of life, and these amenities keep on increasing. And there are incentives for merit and hard work and special needs of the people. So this kind of production, this kind of consumption influences production. So this is the kind of production which is not determined by the markets. This is the kind of production which is not determined by profits in the market. Neither do state policies determine what should be produced and what should not be produced. And not everyone is mandated to consume and produce the same thing like in communism. Production is dependent on consumption, which has minimum requirements at the core of it. And so when we have this form of progressive and diversified consumption and production also increases opportunities for employment, creates local jobs and purchasing capacity. And increasing purchasing capacity is at the core of empowering humans to take control of their own economic lives. So increasing purchasing capacity naturally leads to increased consumption of output, and increased consumption of output produces more demand, and it leads to production. So without profit being the primary motive, consumption and production in Prout is happening to maximally empower communities. And this is what was presented in my paper. So that it doesn't look like socialism or degrowth or one of those other development paradigms which curtails the growth of human capacities. No, that is not what Prout is. Humans are encouraged to use their creativity to produce more things, but without leading to an ecological overshoot. They're encouraged to produce more things while being sustainable and while increasing the purchasing capacity for everybody. And then defining what economic democracy looks like. In most literature, when they talk about economic democracy, they're talking about democratization of the workplace. So I had to set the context right in the paper about what economic democracy looks like. And we all know that these are the 4 requirements of economic democracy within a Prout system. That is, minimum requirements of a particular age should be guaranteed to all, guaranteed increasing purchasing capacity of everybody. These have a direct effect on securing individual rights and securing individual livelihoods. And then coming to community rights and strengthening communities, we have the 3rd and 4th requirement of economic democracy. Power to make economic decisions must be placed in the hands of the local people, and outsiders must be strictly prevented from interfering in the local economy. And some explanation had to be given about why these requirements actually enable just climate change adaptation. That's because self-sufficient and self-reliant local communities are enabled to face the shocks of climate change. They become more resilient, and when they have control over their own natural resources and with the knowledge of the natural resources in their own local region, they know how to build communities to weather the effects of climate change. So that was the intent of introducing economic democracy according to the Prout system. Then some other aspects that was introduced in the paper is purchasing capacity. Purchasing capacity is at the core of economic democracy within a Prout system. This is not the per capita GDP, per capita income. Neither is the average of total wealth. Purchasing capacity is a measure of how a person's or a family's needs can be met through their income, and it can be a reliable index of standard of living. And within a Prout system, purchasing capacity is enhanced through guaranteed employment. This is enshrined in the Constitution as a fundamental economic right. Guaranteed purchasing power for all means that the governments need to take upon themselves to ensure employment opportunities to the people. So with this right, people will have the capacity to acquire their basic needs and amenities and enjoy economic security. And there has been proven research and studies that shows that enhancing household incomes and providing economic security has a proven effect of building climate change resiliency among communities. When each family, each household can take care of their needs, they also naturally become resilient to unpredictable nature of the climate change catastrophes. So full employment was emphasized in the paper. And of course, the objectives of economic democracies are achieved through the principles of decentralized economy within Prout. These are the 5 principles of decentralized economy that we all know: control of the resource base by the local people, production for consumption, not for profit, and emphasis on cooperatives. That is, production and distribution must happen through the cooperatives, and employment of local people and local economic enterprises, and regulation of markets by removing as many non-local commodities as possible. So all these things come together to ensure the requirements of economic democracies. So cooperatives play a vital role in this model. Cooperatives provide jobs to local people, and having jobs and having a purchasing capacity ensures resiliency to climate change, or provides people with the ability to tackle climate change catastrophes. And eliminating the profit motive, where production without a profit motive to secure the needs of the people first, also ensures that external corporations don't come and extract the natural resources of the region and exploit the local natural resources for profit. This naturally ensures efficient utilization of resources to meet the needs of the people first, and once again has implications on sustainable economic growth. So with this introduction in mind, or with this vision in mind, I went on to look into some of the movements and policy proposals that align with the vision of Prout. So Climate Justice Alliance has a just transition framework, which I'll be discussing. And some of the policy proposals, like a case for job guarantee and democratizing work, also serve the vision of Prout. So this was done to ensure that there is alliance building or movement building between different kinds of economic democracy and climate justice movements, and different kinds of policy proposals that serve the vision of Prout. So economic democracy is not just theory, it should be practiced. And to practice anything, or to implement economic democracy, principles of decentralized economy, we need allies. And this was an attempt to find allies and synthesize the commonalities between these movements and the vision of Prout. Prout also provides the framework, vision, or the political economy perspective that could be useful to these other movements also, if we can reach out to them. Each of this movement can use the perspective offered by Prout as a grounding framework for the work they're already doing, and probably enhance the work they're doing. Climate Justice Alliance is one such climate movement, which has been around since 2013. It is a community-based, it has been working with frontline organization, mobilizing people in the process of climate change adaptation. So just transition is one of the main goals of Climate Justice Alliance. And as you can see, their goal, or the entire worldview of Climate Justice Alliance, is to transition from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And in the process of transitioning from an extractive to regenerative economy, justice should be embedded. Justice should be in the forefront of this transition. So as you can see, at the center of both kinds of economy, well, be it an extractive economy or a regenerative economy, meaningful work is placed at the center of both kinds of economies. And making sure that this work is meaningful work that ensures cooperation, ecological and social well-being, environmental regeneration, and care for all the beings of the planet. That is the vision of Climate Justice Alliance, and that resonated very much with the vision of Prout also. And one important thing to mention is that this environmental justice movement grew out of a response to the system of environmental racism, in which the low-income communities and communities of color were disproportionately impacted by the negative effects of pollution. and climate catastrophes and extractive industrial practices. So that led to the movement, and this actually grew out of the movement to ensure racial justice. So naturally, they're looking for a just climate change adaptation in this process. Here are some of the principles of a just transition framework that I thought resonates with Prout. Just transition equitably redistributes resource and powers, and this speaks to the need for economic democracy and power of the people to manage their own economy. Regenerative ecological economics, which talks about the rights of plants and animals in the process of just economic transition to adapt to climate catastrophe. So this is neo-humanism. Just transition to retain culture and tradition. This is basically talking about grassroots wisdom to build resilient economies. And a just transition embodies local, regional, national, and international solidarity. And we can naturally connect this with the proposal for world government within Prout. And just transition talks about to build what we need now, and which is literally one of the principles of decentralized economy, production for the needs of the people first and not for profits. And just transition creates meaningful work. So this talks about job guarantee, wages, and naturally leads to the vision of ever-increasing purchasing capacity, which we talk about in Prout. And uphold self-determination of community, which means local decision-making, local identity, bring communities together through local identity. That is a socio-economic unit within Prout. And then just transition moves us toward buen vivir, which means live well, but not live better at the cost of others. Everyone has a right to live well. So from this just transition framework, I took their emphasis on meaningful work to make a shift, to make a connection between certain job guarantee proposals and democratizing work proposals. So meaningful work creates opportunities for people to learn, grow, and develop their capacities. And Prout is not just a socioeconomic movement or a socioeconomic vision, but it also talks about maximally utilizing people's potentiality and developing human potentiality to its fullest extent. So through meaningful work, people can learn to grow their potentialities. Meaningful works also transforms communities and their environment, because people come together through work and people can define their role within their communities as producers, consumers, workers, in relation to each other, and build a community together. And this actually fosters a process of self-determination. So if you can see, work connects every piece of this just transition framework together. So from a climate change adaptation perspective, self-determination and empowerment through meaningful work acts as an effective tool to realize a world order in which people take complete control of their economy, in which communities build inherent resilience, resources, and skills for crafting their own climate solutions that are suitable to their own needs and to their own regions without depending on extractive economic processes. So the next policy proposal that has the potential of working with the Prout movement and Prout is to enable a just climate change transition is a job guarantee proposal. This is a book called A Case for a Job Guarantee, put together by the economist Pavlina Chernieva. Talks about the benefits of employment, benefits of full employment and its transformative effects on communities. So employment not only guarantees decent living, but also abolishes, when there is an employment guarantee by the government, then it sets the wage at a certain level. So it has the potential of abolishing poverty level wages and creating, abolishing this class of haves and have-nots. I wouldn't say it would completely abolish the class of haves and have-nots, but to some extent it has the effect of reducing the kind of wealth and income gaps we see now. And guaranteed employment also helps people retain their skills. And these skills are very much needed in times of crises. This also talks about developing human potentiality. And improved wages increases household incomes, purchasing power, and ability to secure basic needs. And this has a direct effect on how people can adapt to climate change. In the context of ongoing issues of environmental degradation, discrimination, and wealth disparities, job guarantee policies should be based on care for the environment, care for the community, and care for the people. So she also makes a proposal for green jobs, that is government programs that creates employment to tackle the twin challenges of both employment and climate change. She argues that climate change policy is essentially social and economic policy and vice versa. So climate change policy should be embedded within socio-economic policies, and economic and social policy should be embedded within climate change policies. And this is drastically different from organizing the economy from the perspective of neoliberal values of GDP growth, profit maximization, or per capita income, or whatever other economic indicators that economists look to define whatever they call as growth. But clearly, programs such as job guarantee policies and movements such as Climate Justice Alliance are talking about growth of a different nature. So there is also an advocacy for democratic job guarantee process. And by democratic, she means local people taking care of their local needs and creating jobs that are locally meaningful to them. So this could be local infrastructure based on the kind of predictions they may have for climate change catastrophes. Some communities need to be resilient to fire, some communities need to be resilient to tornadoes, and some communities need to be resilient to floods, which are all the effects of climate change. And we are at a stage where we cannot prevent these catastrophes, but we have to learn to adapt. And creating local jobs through green jobs programs to address these local issues or local ways of dealing with climate change becomes extremely important. So that is what this whole case for job guarantee proposal is talking about. And I see Prout is easily collaborating with something like this and introducing our principles of a decentralized economy and economic democracy to strengthen job guarantee program and situating it within the context of a three-tiered economy, where, of course, the government has a role to create jobs, but also there is private enterprise that can create jobs of certain nature, and then cooperatives create the maximum number of jobs within an economy. The other proposal that I looked into was, again, a book, which was put together by economists and social scientists in the aftermath of COVID-19. It is called Democratize Work. So this book recognizes that work is central to life. We cannot escape work. Work is important to keep the life processes going. Work is important for social reproduction. During the years of COVID-19 pandemic, some of us had the privilege to quarantine at homes and work from home. We were still working, but there were others on the front line, performing essential work of caring for other people, caring for sick people, producing the food we eat and stocking shelves in the grocery, medical workers. So life went on despite quarantine, or despite lockdowns and all those things we're seeing in the COVID-19 pandemic. Life went on because somebody was working, and we call them essential workers. And these were the people who kept life going in the times of need. So this shows that work is essential for social reproduction. Just like in COVID-19, the times of the pandemic, we are living in a time of unpredictability of climate-related events. Life was very unpredictable during the pandemic, and life is going to become unpredictable because of climate change catastrophes. So this has ushered in a new era of uncertainty. And the uncertainty of climate change calls for rethinking how we organize work and how we ensure stability in the society. And that was the context for this book. It's basically a collection of essays from various academics, all of them women, who voiced their need to reorganize work. There was already a collective movement that was talking about the need to reorganize work, and they lent their voice to this collective movement. And this movement was based on the principle of democratization, decommodification, and decarbonization, which means environmental remediation. They advocated for all these three elements to be embedded in the process of reorganizing work and reorganizing the economy for a just climate transition. So the principles of organizing work for just transition, first is democratization of work. So this can fit into the larger plan of economic democracy, because in this context, they're talking about shifting the decision-making powers from CEOs and owners and employers to workers. So representation of workers in decision-making bodies that naturally leads to worker-owned economic enterprises like co-ops, and raising the wage floor and reducing the highest and the lowest income gap. And this is the principle of minimum requirements, maximum amenities, and bridging the gap between the two that we see in Prout. The second principle they advocated for is de-commodification of labor. That is protecting work from becoming a fictitious commodity. Work is embedded within the life process. Work is not separate from the life process. The work and the worker cannot be separated. So in some sense, work cannot be put up on sale, but work should be used and can be used to make life better for everybody. Therefore, work should not be treated as all other commodities and should not be sold and purchased on the market. And just the market mechanism alone should not determine the value of work, which means there should be no poverty level wages. And essential work should be recognized and rewarded the way it should be rewarded. And also decommodification of work talks about transitioning to a green economy. And when work is decommodified, when the transition to a green economy happens, the nature of work changes. But if the work is decommodified, then there is no job loss. There is no market mechanism which comes and says this work, this labor is not needed, so we're going to eliminate it completely and keep people in poverty or in a state of joblessness. Decommodification offers certain job guarantees and job securities and changes the nature of work through skills training when a transition to a green economy happens, and it should happen. The third principle of organizing work for just transition is decarbonizing, which they also called as environmental remediation. So this principle advocates for demanding accountability and responsibility for carbon emissions from all kinds of economic enterprises. And economic enterprises should be compelled to decarbonize their process. And in this process, new kinds of work or new kinds of employment and technologies may be needed. So they should enable the workers to pick up these new skills and decarbonize their processes. Basically advocating for transition from environmental destruction models to environmental regeneration model. As we see, amid growing inequalities along gender, class, and racial lines in an extractivist economy, and with the implications of climate change, democratizing work has to include all these elements. It is not just about, democratizing the workplace and forgetting about everything else. All these things should come together and work well to ensure that there is economic democracy and also environmental remediation by ensuring meaningful work. So ultimately, the paper focused on, or I hope it got the message across about the focus of building alliances, a socioeconomic vision that was offered by Prout, a broad vision of including everybody in the paradigm of growth, which includes both progress of humans and non-human creatures of the universe. And then there were movements like the Climate Justice Alliance movements, and there were policies, like the job guarantee policies and democratizing work policies. All of this can come together to enable a justice-based climate change adaptation. And the intent of this paper was to find an alignment between all the movements and the policy proposals, and also have this paper be a form of communication between all the movements and policy proposals. I guess with that, there should be a recognition of that economy should be embedded within the society and within the environmental context, and it's not the other way around. The society, people, and the environment is not present to serve the economy, but the economy should function to serve these other elements of life, like the society and the environment. And that is how justice-based climate change adaptation can happen. That brings me to the end of the presentation. And I think we have a few minutes for discussion and questions. I see one raised hand. Mark Friedman.
Can I go?
Oh, I think Prakash was first. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay. I thought you might have said.
You're already talking, Mark.
Go ahead, Prakash.
Oh, okay, all right. Thank you, Shriraksha. That's wonderful. Just seeing how all those things align with what Prout are trying to accomplish. And when I was looking at the economic democracy model in Prout, I was thinking, oh, there's one thing that's missing, but it's implicit because it's the first principle of Prout, which talks about there being a limit on material accumulation.
Yes.
And ironically, the biggest obstacle to establishing economic democracy in the current world is the fact that we basically prioritize unlimited accumulation.
Mm-hmm.
So every one of these movements that we're talking about, the biggest obstacle to accomplishing the vision is the fact that we don't have the power at this point to actually create a world where we can put limits on the accumulation of wealth. And interesting, in the 1930s, one of the things that made the New Deal so powerful and successful in many ways is that it had a 90% plus marginal tax rate. So there wasn't a limit on accumulation of wealth in terms of principle, but in practice, because of that high tax rate, that's what we had. So the people who were advancing from the end of the Second World War up to 1980, the fastest were the people who were the poorest. And the people who were advancing the slowest were the wealthiest. And now, since 1980, it's completely flipped. And we're seeing why we need these models. And those models need to include both the recognition that we have a finite material world, but people as spiritual beings have an unlimited longing. And so if we don't talk about spirituality, we don't know how we can challenge that drive for unlimited material accumulation. So that would add a lot of strength to all of these movements.
Agree with you, Prakash, and that's why I was emphasizing on redefining what growth looks like. Capitalism doesn't even talk about spirituality. So it's all about the next fancy, piece of jewelry I buy or a fancy gadget I buy that brings happiness. So talking about redefining growth and also redefining the metrics through which we measure growth. I don't know how you would measure spiritual growth, but when you say purchasing capacity for all, that actually says everybody's basic needs are met, so they have an opportunity to move ahead in life and to grow spiritually and intellectually. That probably offers some starting point to recognize, to reduce the kind of inequalities we are seeing now.
Also, I think we would have much fewer hours we would need to work to attain our minimum necessities.
Yes, I didn't go over all of that in my presentation, but when you see all these policies, right, like job guarantee policy, and when you see even this democratizing work policies, they do talk about progressive workplaces where, the working hours are reduced significantly.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark Friedman.
Thank you. Yeah, your presentation raised many thoughts that we won't have time to go over, but I hope we can have some further conversations. Just perhaps a simple question. You seem to imply that climate or production that's more climate friendly will just kind of come about through institutional changes. What is the role of regulation, both for climate change and environment in general? I think we can see that perhaps even cooperatives might at some times want to cut corners if they don't have proper guidance. So, have you given that some thought?
To be honest, I haven't given it too much thought, but I think the inevitability of climate catastrophes, right? Because there are going to push us in that direction. I focused on climate change movements that are focusing on just climate adaptation, like Climate Justice Alliance. They focus on just climate adaptation. But if you see most other climate movements, like the Sunrise Movement and others, they are directly going after fossil fuel-led growth and fossil fuel companies. So I see that there is a transition, although happening slowly, towards greener technologies and greener ways of producing the things we need. But in the process of this transition, I'm more concerned about what does it look like for the poorest of the poor? Would they be losing their jobs? Would they be just displaced from their stable employment? And that is where how we reorganize work comes into picture. And that is what I was focusing on this presentation. But I do think that there are a lot of climate movements that are going after fossil fuel-led production and fossil fuel companies.
It seems like you make a strong case for, the concept, and it seems to be shared across a number of different approaches of full employment. And it looks like the case could be made that, in effect, government can almost be a last recourse employer that can implement programs like you were saying, or some of the organizations were proposing. It almost sounds like a revisitation of the New Deal programs, like the CCC camps, where much of the national park infrastructure and a lot of other things were built by people, massive unemployment during the Great Depression. Is that kind of one of the things that you're seeing that seems to be across a lot of these approaches?
At least in the job guarantee program, she's talking about that. She's talking about creating green jobs because that is becoming the need of the hour. And the green jobs could be something like CCC, where jobs are created to build climate resilient infrastructure. In fact, there is a job guarantee program in India, Mahatma Gandhi Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. And they are talking about creating providing guaranteed rural jobs and kind of modifying those jobs to serve the needs of the community to build climate resilience. So that is where she brings in this concept of green jobs in her job guarantee proposal.
Actually, it was my fault. I didn't share that you're working on a master's in social and applied economics. And I think it might be interesting for you to clarify, how do you distinguish that from some of the other options within economics? And I'd just be curious how you zeroed in on that yourself.
On the job guarantee proposal?
No, on the master's program where you're focusing on social and applied economics. How do you distinguish that from what maybe a lot of us just think is an economics degree?
I mean, there was a lot of preparation building up to this. I did speak to a lot of people, zeroed in on programs that had a focus on heterodox economics in the USA. And that's how I landed in this program. So
I think Mark has another question.
Yeah, feel free to cut me off at any point. I don't want to deprive anybody else. But as I said, your presentation just raised lots and lots of thoughts. Again, with the job guarantee, I think we do want to distinguish a little bit. It's a great idea, and I think we can get a lot of guidance with a lot of authors that are working with job guarantees now. But to some extent, that is, I think, would be a necessary solution in a capitalist context, which tends towards excessive unemployment. So that's kind of a lever that would alleviate that. Which it would be different in a number of ways in a Proutist context. But I guess my question is, you talk about a parity between production and consumption, but you don't talk about markets very much. And it seems like Prout does operate within markets, and how we structure those markets are likely to be quite different. Of course, there's the government sector, which would be absolutely non-profit.
I would like to say in the paper, I did speak about three-tiered economy, in which I mentioned about the 3 tiers. In this presentation, I didn't bring it in because I thought I was just, because of time limit or whatever, I put the slides together just 2 hours before this presentation, but I have spoken in the paper about the 3-tiered economic structure. And the government sector is run on the no profit, no loss basis. And in fact, I've spoken about this to make a distinction between communism and Prout, right? To make a distinction that not everything is state controlled. State controls only those enterprises that have a large scale effect, and that should be run on no profit, no loss. Most of it should happen through cooperatives, essential production and distribution. And of course, private enterprises should have a smaller role in this whole economy. So does that speak to how the markets are structured in a Prout economy?
To an extent, sure. Then again, we're talking about increasing purchasing capacity. I think we're not talking about planners creating that, supplying that purchasing capacity. I think to an extent we are talking about market mechanisms aligned with planning mechanisms.
I would argue that the principles of decentralized economy feed that goal of increasing purchasing capacity. The principles act as policies that should be serving the requirements of economic democracy of increasing purchasing capacity, and that was presented in the paper as well. So because we have these principles, and because these principles serve the policy goals of ensuring jobs through cooperatives and regulating markets, et cetera, naturally it would feed the requirements of economic democracy. In the paper itself, I've said a little bit about block level planning, but most of it was about trying to find the commonalities between these movements for a just climate change adaptation.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe as an aside, I will mention that when we were promoting Raksha's program, there's actually a link to her paper that she's making reference to. So people can look that up. I don't think I could copy all of it right now into the chat, but it is available still on the announcement about our program this evening. So if people are interested, you can access the entire paper. And I encourage people. I mean, it was very well done and was published, which is a credit to Raksha as a graduate student that it actually was picked up and published by the university. Alberta.
Thank you very much for actually putting this together to actually help understand who the Prout allies are. I appreciate the importance of that. Is there any organization that is attempting to network these to network organizations in terms of the commonalities? I mean, anything on the ground trying to create networks. Is this a question clear?
With the Prout movement?
Well, it wouldn't have to do it necessarily with the Prout movement. It could be, is there any movement? Is there any organization that's attempting to network these economic movements?
My goal with this paper was to kind of help both Proutists and non-Proutist network.
Exactly. I understand that. Is there anybody is there anyone using your paper to try to do that?
Well, I mean, if I go back and see the number of downloads on that link for the paper, there are a few hundred downloads, but I don't know what they're doing with the downloaded paper. So I think we should take it as Proutists, we should take it as a starting point to reach out to these movements and authors and introduce kind of, the Prout principles of economic democracy and decentralized economy, and explain to them that this might serve your own goal of job guarantee proposal if the economy is so structured in this way and whatnot.
So potentially it's up to us, is maybe what I'm hearing you say.
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
I'm curious, you reference a number of books. By any chance, did you actually have any interaction with the authors of those books? Because that seems like it would have been an opportunity to link together.
Not really. My professor has had interactions with some of those authors, and that's how she referenced those books with me. And she is very much interested in feminist economy and these kind of fields. So she did conduct a course in which she was introducing us to feminist economist scholars, and that's how I came across these two books.
I want to be sensitive to both Raksha's time and other people's time.